America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation.
And I'm Jamie Bowers, a producer here on the show.
Thanks for joining us and being our Ed McMahon again, Jamie.
Hey, I am happy to sit on a couch anytime.
Well, not exactly a couch, but close.
You all can couch.
Figuratively, yes. Please subscribe to the show at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcasts from. Jamie, today we're joined by our very good friend, Dr. Dan Gropper. Dan is the Dean of the College of Business at Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, Florida. He's a graduate of the University of Maryland and Florida State University, and he joined FAU after 25 years at Auburn University, where he was a professor and associate dean for graduate and international programs. So I'm looking forward to talking to Dean Gropper.
Yes, although all of the schools he's been associated with, except for Florida Atlantic University, are schools that I do not like to play in football as an alumni of Indiana University and somebody who grew up in South Bend with Notre Dame. But I'll forgive him for those things.
They do have a football team. I'm sure you can ask him about it too. I wanted to talk just briefly about our support on this, urging Congress to pass HJ Resolution 88, which will stop the Biden administration's backdoor student loan bailout. I know we've spent a lot of time talking about it, but this is the income-driven replacement rule that increases the share of student loan borrowers exempt income to 225% of the federal poverty line. And it's estimated to cost taxpayers $559 billion. Now, the Supreme Court case that we took that we filed against the administration and took all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court thankfully blocked that, was $430 billion. So the administration continues to just ignore not only what the Supreme Court said, but come back with these programs that are workarounds, basically, that are still, not constitutional, and they're costing more. They're costing taxpayers even more. Instead of even examining how do we stop universities from continuing this unsustainable increase in tuition, it's just ridiculous. It's lawlessness.
Yeah, I mean, it truly is a constitutional issue, and we all learned in high school civics about the role of Congress and the power of the purse. And clearly, this is kind of an end run around that. And I think, again, we've talked about this in the past, Elaine. It's a little bit of careful what you wish for. If these kind of precedents are set, and the same people who are very for this are going to be very against, a conservative president who's in place and decides to do something on immigration using the same kind of tactics, or decides to put in another policy that way. And at the end of the day, if you've got Congress who can spend a ton of money, clearly right now, Congress, both left and right, are not too discouraged from spending a lot of taxpayer dollars, especially dollars they don't have that they're going to have to borrow. And then if you have an executive branch who is doing the same thing and inflating it even more, there's just a certain point where they run out of money.
It is what the Democratic Party believes in, that modern monetary policy, where as long as you keep printing it, you can spend it, and there's no consequences for it. I mean, since the Supreme Court blocked the student loan bailout last year, or earlier this year in June, the Biden administration has wiped out nearly $130 billion for 3.6 million borrowers. And last week, they added to that total, announcing forgiveness of student loans for another 800,000 borrowers. So they're going to surpass the cost of what was originally blocked by the Supreme Court very quickly, instead of even looking at how to decrease the costs. And I had an op-ed in Real Clear Education. It's an op-ed by me called "Why Biden's Student Loan Bailout Workarounds Won't Solve the College Tuition Crisis." And here's a perfect example. You know, we've said all along that every time the president pushes to forgive student loans, it's like writing a blank check to these colleges and universities so that they can continue hiring administrators, which is basically bureaucracy. It's not faculty, it's bureaucracy. And building, Taj Mahal, gold-plated buildings and resort-style amenities. Texas Christian University recently announced a significant tuition hike that will make the schools even more expensive than Harvard University. Imagine that. I mean, Harvard University is sort of the school you look at of that is got to be the most expensive school in the country. No, Texas University is more expensive. And several other colleges, including Ohio State, the University of Oklahoma, and Rutgers, all announced tuition hikes for their freshman class. And as long as the president and the administration continues to look for ways to feed the beast, they're going to continue passing tuition hikes on to these students. And they're chasing their tail and they're not helping future students.
No, you're exactly right. And what does it mean for the people who are taking out loans today to pay these exorbitant student loan prices? They're going to say, well, why aren't my loans being forgiven? What's that's not fair. I mean, it really is this very strange situation where you're taking this little pocket of people who have, well, it's not little, it's a big pocket of people who currently have student loans, and making this exception for them. And we've talked about the fairness aspect of that. It certainly essentially punishes people who were financially conservative and paid off their loans and honored their debts. And then, as you said, it only encourages the people who are charging these crazy prices. I mean, the reason you need a loan is because these schools have gotten so crazy. And I, in some ways, I get it. They're now competing with one another. Well, they have this sports center that has all the latest equipment for all their students to use. We don't have that. Or this school serves sushi and organic muffins, and we have to do something similar. There is very few of those things have anything to do with whether or not somebody's getting a good education. And as you said, adding bureaucrats is not adding instructors. It's not adding good teachers. It's not adding good professors. The whole system needs to be shaken up. And like you said, this is only encouraging them to keep the status quo, which is unfair for future generations.
Yeah, and I think that some of the things we've talked about as far as solutions on how to hold these colleges accountable is by making them have some financial skin in the game so that they are underwriting some of these college degrees, some of these college loans, so that they are also offering degree programs that actually have jobs attached to them, and then being very transparent and realistic about students' expectations that, if they're going to study, gender studies or, how shrimps exercise on a treadmill, that there's a job attached to it or there's not a job attached to it and what that job may pay, so that they know, okay, if I'm going to take out $75,000 for this degree, but I'm only going to get a job that pays $18,000 a year, the numbers just don't add up. So transparency there. And I know Republicans in the Senate put forth about 5 separate bills that call for a lot of those things. But of course, it's gone nowhere because I really think this is a vote buying exercise. It was a vote buying exercise in the midterms, and it's a vote buying exercise now.
Yeah, and it's for a very specific demographic. Agreed. I've always thought it was there was a lot more the student loan community could do to help students by encouraging them from a financial standpoint to seek out majors that both fit their skills, but also fit the job market. As you said, there's no other loan that we get in our lives, like a big loan like this. I mean, a mortgage or a car loan, there is collateral. And clearly, the value of a business degree is different than the value of a French medieval history degree or whatever it might be. And so I think there should be different terms to the loans associated with that, or at least some education where somebody says, hey, you're trying to get a loan for $35,000 a year, and your major is likely going to pay you $60,000 a year. How's that going to work?
Yeah. Well, our guest coming on can certainly talk to that as well, since he is the dean at a university in Florida. It is time for our interview with Dr. Dan Gropper. At FAU, he leads one of the top 20 largest AACSB accredited business schools in the United States, with over 8,000 students across 3 campuses and several programs ranked by U.S. News & World Report, the Financial Times, and others. Dan, welcome to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We're so glad you could make it today. I know you've got a lot going on down in Boca Raton at FAU, but tell us a little bit about FAU. This school it's grown a lot. I've told you many times that I grew up in South Florida, so I'm very well aware of FAU. I have several friends who graduated from there. And I think it's just such a phenomenal school, and I've been to the campus several times. So tell us about it.
Well, I agree. It's a great place. It's like much of South Florida. It's growing very rapidly. There's a vibrancy here. People are coming here from all over the world, and they're attracted by that economic freedom that characterizes Florida, and particularly the dynamism in South Florida is phenomenal. We have people coming here from South America, Central America, the Caribbean, and there's just an entrepreneurial spirit and an appreciation of free enterprise that I love. It's what drew me here. There's about 30,000 total students. A little over 8,000 of those are business school students. We have a route here of serving the business professionals who are working. So we started with a lot of evening and weekend programs in the College of Business. But now we also do a lot of online programs and hybrid programs so that people can do some work from home, do a lot of classes live, interactive, as well as in person. It's a great place here. We have a brand new business building across the street, and we just hosted a big conference with 1,400 people from the business community here. So it was a very vibrant area. We had people from entrepreneurship backgrounds and new entrepreneurial companies and financial firms that are looking to find investment opportunities. So it's really just fabulous. It's a young university, and was founded in the early 60s, and it's rapidly growing. So it's an exciting place to be. And we also have some guys now who play a little basketball. So we made it to the Final Four last year. So the student attendance at basketball games, the place is packed. It's sold out for the whole season, and it's just a lot of fun. So we take our academics seriously, but we also have a good time.
That's great.
That's great. What do you think, as you have a lot of students who are actually in the business world, who are going back to business school to learn things, what are the kinds of things that the skills and the knowledge that they're looking for? If you're an entrepreneur or a small business person and you're going back to school, what do they tend to focus on in terms of filling those gaps that they may not have?
So it's a very interesting mix of students. So we have people who are from the creative side, and we have also a very strong group who are really stronger in the analytics side. So one of our programs that's really been a strength for many, many years is accounting, and now accounting and finance, particularly here in South Florida, that's growing. So accounting is a great foundation for business. And we always tell our entrepreneurial students, if you understand accounting, you understand the balance sheet and the cash flows, you'll be successful. So for the accountants, we then look to enhance their creative skills. And then for the people who come in with the creative background, we look to increase the accounting and finance, the hard skills, the analytic skills that help them be successful as business people. And one of the things we're really proud of is that we have these entrepreneurial students. We have high rankings, but perhaps more important is I'm amazed at the individual students and their creativity. So when we have a chance, I'll tell you a story about just a few of those.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Before you get to that, though, I wanted to ask you, what we've seen in higher education is, many of the faculty tend to lean more liberal, and you see that taught in the classes across the spectrum, and focused not on capitalism and free market and everything that you always talk about with, you mentioned you're a student of Milton Friedman, and, the conservative voice and the voices that support capitalism, tend to be a much smaller minority there. What do you see with the students coming into the College of Business at FAU? Or do you find a mix of students? Do you find students that are open to hearing both sides, or are they coming in already kind of indoctrinated, if you will, from TV and social media?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that so much of the social media and so much of the things that are sensationalized really guide young people in that direction of more socialism, more government intervention. I don't find that, though, really being very persuasive to so many of our business students. Most of our business students, many of them are first generation in college. So they're used to working hard. They're used to having a part-time job. They're used to taking responsibility for their own actions. And many of their parents are immigrants to America who fled socialism. They left Cuba. They left Venezuela. They left these other countries. They know that socialism is not the answer. And so here in the business school, particularly, what we find is students who want to be successful in business. And as I say, in any business plan, nobody ever started a successful business plan by saying, the first thing I'm going to do is exploit my consumers. It's like, no, they say, well, what can I do that creates a business where I can attract customers, where I can make a better product? And we see that over and over. So from my part, it's not to say that those students, they aren't bombarded by that and you won't find them across the university, but I suspect you're more likely to find them in other areas of the university than, say, in the business school or the engineering school. We tend to focus on students who really are going to be entrepreneurs, they're going to have a successful career, and they aren't buying into a lot of that other stuff. I should say, too, that you mentioned that I was a student who appreciated Milton Friedman. And so economics always made sense to me. And I've always been very front saying I'm a very free market oriented economist. I do that when we're recruiting people or hiring faculty. And I get more faculty who say that's a refreshing approach than who find that troubling.
I can imagine. You mentioned you have students that are very focused on being entrepreneurs. I wonder if you might share an interesting story about any of your students who've gone on to start businesses that would be unique in the business world.
Yeah, we have a couple of those. We have one guy, Jam Bendar, who I've been here about 10 years now, and he was here the first year that I was here. He won the student business plan competition, and he started a company that's been very successful. It's called Ship Monk, like SHIP Monk, and it's a shipping and logistics business it's grown into. And basically, he's competing with Amazon, but providing services for small businesses that gives them better services, better pricing, and so on. He's been incredibly successful. More recently, we have two graduates who are at almost opposite ends of the entrepreneurial spectrum, but both of whom I just love. One is Ariel Burrell, and she started a company called Rielli, and she was picked by Forbes magazine as Forbes 30 under 30 this year for Miami. And she's doing custom design and custom size swimwear. So she has these beautiful artistic swimwear designs. She's originally from one of the islands in the Caribbean, learned to sew from her grandmother. And so she's fabulous. She's gotten her swimsuits design picked up in Sports Illustrated and other magazines, and the business has taken off. So she's getting this recognition. She's got a website, and it's filled with beautiful people and beautiful women wearing swimwear and the covers to go from the beach and so on. At the opposite side of that is we have a young man, Pierce Kennemer, who just graduated in the spring, and he focused on another problem that meets a consumer need in South Florida, and it's a pest control business. And he's specializing in iguana removal. So he's got these iguana traps with a proprietary gate to get into the traps. And so he puts them out, leaves them overnight. The iguanas come in and they eat this mix of, I think it's bananas and mangoes or something. And he has now a whole squad of people that he's hired to come remove these traps that may have 10 or 12 or more iguanas in them overnight. And that's a tremendous problem here in South Florida. Golf courses, public parks, and he started a program with the Miami-Dade Parks this spring, and it took off. It was fabulously successful. So here's a young man who's a finance major. He was president of the student government. I thought he was going to be going to work for a big, Bank of America or somebody like that, and he's instead got his T-shirt and jeans on and is doing iguana removal. And then we've got Ariel doing what she's doing. And so these are students who are pursuing whatever their dreams are. They're learning the business techniques they need. They've got an idea and they're practicing. And I just couldn't be prouder of those young people.
Those are great stories. A friend of mine lives in Miami, and he was just saying he had a giant iguana had fallen into his pool, and they had to figure out a way to get him out and save him. But just don't tell us where he takes those iguanas. I don't know that I want to go there.
I should add this. So when he started the business last spring, he was paying a disposal fee. They were euthanizing the iguanas and then disposing them. But in a good entrepreneurial way, he found some people, and just like alligators, there are some people who will eat iguana meat, and he's now found somebody, an exotic meat distributor, and so he's delivering the iguanas to the meat distributor. So now he's making money selling the iguanas, who will then become a food source for those folks. So what was previously a cost is now going to be a revenue stream. And so with that kind of thinking, I know young Mr. Kennemer is going to be a successful entrepreneur.
And for our listeners and viewers, iguanas are considered pests in South Florida because they're overrun with them. And when the temperatures drop just even a little bit, we have what's called falling iguanas, and they literally will fall out of trees everywhere because they freeze and they can't take the cold at all. So they freeze. So they have to be removed.
Yeah, when I first moved to South Florida and I heard that, I thought my colleagues were playing a joke on me. When they said, "Oh, it's gotten temperatures going down close to 40 degrees. Watch out for falling iguanas." But you're exactly right. And the other thing though that happens is this is a restriction on Pierce's business ultimately, because the iguanas don't get too far north of Orlando. But you're right, there are tremendous problem here on personal property. Their health dangers because they leave waste all over the place in people's backyards. And if your kids go out there and play, or your dogs go out, it carries disease and so on. So it's both an annoyance and a serious health problem. Pierce is also working on configuring those traps so that they might catch pythons. And they keep out, kittens and cats and dogs and raccoons out of these traps. And so that's the proprietary gate design into the traps. So that's important. Obviously, you don't want to catch things you don't want to catch, and so
Right.
his design does that. So, like I say, it's just that entrepreneurial spirit. Our students are looking to do that, and we have a bunch of programs that help them. We have business mentors that help give them advice, legal advice, and other sorts of things to start those business. And we're here. That's part, I think, of the American dream, is thinking about what you want to do, having that freedom to start a business if you want to, having a freedom to choose whatever occupation you want. And the fact that we have faculty and business mentors that want to support that, that's exactly the kind of college of business that I'm proud to help build.
I think those are just great stories to talk about. But I wonder how some of your success stories that you talk about are faring under Bidenomics. I'm going to shift gears on you a little bit because we had the PCE come out, one of the inflation reports last week, and still continues to show inflation increasing and hurting our small businesses, hurting success stories like you just talked about. I mean, what are your thoughts on Bidenomics? The Fed's been so aggressive in increasing interest rates, and I just wanted to kind of tap your thoughts there because I know you study that quite a bit.
Sure. As a professional economist and one who's done a lot of research on monetary matters and financial institutions over my career, I'm really concerned about a couple of things that I see going on. One is that I think the Federal Reserve has wandered a bit from paying attention to keeping inflation under control, keeping the money supply growing at an appropriate rate. It's one thing to have a crisis with the housing markets or a crisis with COVID, but still we've stayed with expansionary policy too long. And now this president's appointments to the Federal Reserve Board are people that are qualified economists, but they're more worried about their labor economists. They are people that are concerned about things like inequality, and they're not concerned with things like controlling inflation. They're not concerned as much with those traditional topics. So this moves the Federal Reserve Board in a way that is pushing towards a pro-inflationary environment. Secondly, you have a change in operating policies that get down into the details, paying interest on reserves, on required reserves. This is a little technical within the bank regulation kind of issue, but if you're paying, the Federal Reserve is paying banks interest on their excess reserves, that is then an alternative to lending out that money to businesses. So this then just pays the banks to keep the money with the Fed and not to lend it out. That then changes the incentives to make loans to small businesses, and those small businesses need those loans. If they're not coming from the banking system, where are they going to get them? They have to look for alternative sources. The other thing with Bidenomics, just generally, if you looked at it, I'd say there's a tilt towards greater regulation, greater federal government control of our economy. So you're passing more regulations, you're changing, subsidizing some activities that are favored by the federal government and taxing others. They make it harder to get new business licenses. There are a lot of things that go on that basically shift from a more free market orientation to a more government controlled orientation. That increases the power of politicians, but it tends to slow the free market. It tends to lead to lower rates of growth over time. And that lower rate of growth is something that really concerns me. This is kind of a slow slide towards a socialist mentality. It may not be government ownership of resources, but it's government control of resources through the regulatory process. And longer term, this has never worked. It's never worked wherever it's tried. And so I'd like to learn those lessons. I don't want to empower the federal government to control the economy. I want to empower entrepreneurs, right? And so that's my concern as a professional economist. We're tilting all that federal apparatus towards central control out of Washington, D.C. and out of those D.C. regulatory agencies. and away from the private sector and the entrepreneurs.
Well, and you said that many of the students at your university are first-time students, or their family, first ones in their families to go to college. And I feel like when the government starts adding more of a regulatory burden and more hurdles to starting a business, it really hurts immigrant families and families that have not necessarily climbed the economic ladder yet, who don't have an uncle or a father or a mother to tell them, oh, here's how you do this. Here's how you start a business. And it really hurts that community that is usually a very hardworking entrepreneurial community. It only makes it harder for them to start businesses and get going, because the paperwork and the red tape to get it going is too onerous.
No, you're absolutely right. In many cases, a lot of those businesses that are started are things that are what I'll call physical related businesses. They are like the iguana removals. They are the lawn services. They are the construction people. And if you create impediments to who's cutting your lawn and who's trimming your bushes, those are things where you have to have a real serious question. I mean, these are not things like doing surgery, right? These are things that if somebody cuts your bushes a little too closely, it's, down here in South Florida, the rain and the weather will fix that, and that bush will grow back in a couple of weeks, right? So removing those impediments to starting a business, taking the time, instead of figuring out how to work through a regulatory process, which can be very difficult for a first generation, a new entrepreneur. You're exactly right. We want to remove those impediments. We want to reduce those things where it doesn't endanger the public health, right? Where it doesn't endanger personal safety. Those are things where you really have to look at why we have some of those burdens, and do we really need them?
Do you agree, though, with what the Fed has done to slow down inflation with the increasing interest rates at such an aggressive clip? I know, you came to our summit a few weeks ago, or back in early November, and, that was some of the discussion. Actually, that was some of the argument, was there was one side that was saying we need to raise interest rates and slow down the economy. And the other side of the panel was saying, no, why do we want to slow down the economy by increasing interest rates? Where do you fall in that?
I think first of all, there's such a flood of money that have been pushed into the system that they had to find a way to pull that back down. I would focus on the rate of growth of the money supply more than the interest rates per se. Okay, so this is a little bit about technical economics, but if you reduce that rate of growth of the money supply, that helps. The interest rate is a blunt instrument, right? So you're sort of pushing that up so much that you're trying to push the economy into recession. That hurts certain sectors more than others. It hurts capital formation, it hurts housing, and that's a serious problem. Here's the thing you need to do. We've got a problem right now that is huge with how are we going to finance the debt. We have these deficits that are huge. We have a national debt that is still exploding. And what the current administration has done on the fiscal side is they've pushed all that money in. How did they do that? The discipline to say we need to restrict spending is gone. They've come up with a so-called modern monetary policy, which basically just said you can keep printing money and spending it. This basic idea is nonsense. This has been done in many other countries. They just print money and spend it. So I've got, my desk over here, I've got several $200 million Venezuelan bolivar bills. You can be a millionaire, no problem. You can just print those up and send them out. But we've removed the restrictions on the Federal Reserve increasing the money supply that way. What requires discipline is people who are going to follow sound economic logic. Right now, the pressures are just to spend money on the federal side for their chosen projects, and they don't want to cut that off. To go back to the other part, what would be a better way to do that? It gets back to the technical aspects of managing the money supply and managing the Federal Reserve. But I'm afraid some sort of monetary discipline is not likely to be coming from the group of people we have there now. That's just not their focus. They are focused on spending, spending, spending while they have the people in place. And so it's really the fiscal side that's pushing these things up. One last point I will make is, remember, inflation is the rate of change of prices. So even if inflation would come to zero, prices would be stuck at a much higher level than they were when this administration took place.
Yes,
okay?
and that's what they play with, is that number, the inflation numbers coming down or slowing, but the prices are so elevated that people are still hurting.
Exactly. So you're still paying $4 a gallon for gas instead of $2.
Yeah.
Okay, it stays at $4. The inflation, the price increase on gas has stopped, but you still stopped at a higher level. Some people will complain that, well, you don't want to see deflation. Deflation's worse than inflation. What I will tell you is deflation in consumer products is what every consumer wants to see. We like it when the price of our computers goes down. We like it when the price of gasoline goes down. We like it when the price of phones go down. Asset price deflation, and this may be a topic for another conversation, but asset price deflation is a different thing. If your house was worth $500,000 and then it drops from $500,000 to $400,000, then you've got a problem.
Yeah.
So as an economist, I make a distinction between consumer price inflation in the price of goods and asset price deflation in the price of assets, like your home, like your stock portfolio. Hopefully that'll make sense to you guys and to your listeners.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So if we put you in charge, your prescription for this economy would have been to stop the reckless spending so we don't have to increase interest rates at such a painful clip.
I would do things that reduce the cost of production. We'd go back to reducing the regulation restrictions on oil production. We'd produce more oil. We'd drill and extract more. The cost of energy affects everything.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
by
sure.
restricting that, it's devastating for our economic system, and it's devastating internationally because economics also affects international politics.
Yeah.
So by not producing it here, doesn't mean people stop consuming oil and oil products. They just buy them from someone else. So we're sending that business to other countries. And in many cases, that's led to some of the instability that we now observe. Economics affects politics, and it affects, things like peace around the world. So you hate to see that. It's complicated, but it's also common sense. It's not that hard to connect those dots. So we would cut the cost of oil and energy, generally speaking. We would stop trying to subsidize so many different things, and we'd let market factors work. We would let people innovate, and we remove the barriers to innovation. So basically be reduce regulatory costs, reduce the inflationary push, and devolve some of that power back out of Washington to the private sector. Unfortunately, that's usually not in the interest of politicians.
No.
When you have power, you typically want to use it. You don't want to give it away.
Well, Dean Gropper, I wish that the administration would listen to some of your advice, because I think it would really help our small business owners. And I want to thank you very much for taking the time to join us today on Main Street Matters, America's Small Business Megaphone. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network, and new episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. Please subscribe at salempodcastnetwork.com or wherever you get your podcast from.